The wind off the Tyrrhenian Sea carried the smell of salt and something else. Something sharp, metallic, ancient. On a narrow strip of Italian beach in 1822, the pyre roared. Beneath the flames lay what was left of Percy Shelley, poet, heretic, runaway husband, and the other half of a love story that had been courting death from the very first kiss. The fire ate fast. It opened his skin like paper, curled his hands into claws, and drew smoke from his chest in thick black ribbons. The men tending the fire stepped back from the heat. They knew what the sea had done to him. They thought they knew what the fire would finish, but when the flames collapsed into embers, it was still there. A heart, white as bone, whole, unburned. It was lifted from the ash and given to the woman who had shared his bed, his exile, his grief. She wrapped it in silk and locked it away, not in a vault, not in a reliquary, but in her writing desk. It would stay there for 30 years between the pages of half-finished novels and beside locks of her dead children's hair. Her name was Mary Shelley, and if you think Frankenstein was her masterpiece, you've never heard the story of the life that she lived to write it. But to understand how this story ends in ash, you have to see how it began in a graveyard. London, 1814. 16-year-old Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin walked through the garden of St. Pancras Old Church, where her mother lay buried. Her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, the revolutionary author of A Vindication of the Rights of Women. She died 11 days after Mary's birth. Her father was William Godwin, philosopher and political radical, who raised Mary with books, but little tenderness. Mary grew up unmothered, restless, and her imagination sharpened on gravestones. That summer she saw him, Percy Shelley, 5 years older, wealthy, and already notorious. Expelled from Oxford for atheism, publicly denounced for radical politics, and married to another woman. His eyes burned with a kind of dangerous conviction. She listened. He saw her listening, and something locked between them. Not gentle, not safe, but irresistible. They began meeting in secret, in bookshops, along the Thames, but most often at her mother's grave. That place had always been Mary's sanctuary, and now it became something else. It was there, pressed against the earth of her mother's tomb, that she gave herself to Percy for the first time. Their love began under the shadow of death, and it would never step out from under it. Their love was a scandal England could not tolerate. Mary was 16. Percy was married to Harriet Westbrook, who was already pregnant with his child. When Mary and Percy ran away together, Mary's stepsister Claire Claremont joined them. Newspapers erupted, her father condemned them, and friends abandoned them. The three fled to Europe, wandering through France and Switzerland, often penniless. They walked for miles, begged for loans, and lived on bread and broth. Percy preached free love, but with Mary, he declared they were one spirit in two bodies. But death followed. In 1815, their first daughter, Clara, died in infancy. Their second son, William, died at age 3. Another daughter, also named Clara, died of dysentery in Italy. Mary later said that she felt like a walking graveyard. Then came Harriet's end. In December of 1816, Harriet Shelley drowned herself in London Serpentine, pregnant and abandoned. Days later, Mary and Percy married. It silenced some scandal, but the stain never lifted. Their union was already haunted. The year was called the Year Without a Summer. A volcanic eruption in faraway Indonesia had blackened skies across Europe. Crops failed, storms lashed, and Lake Geneva sat under permanent gloom. Mary, Percy, and Claire rented a house by the lake near Lord Byron's Villa Diodati. With Byron was his doctor, John Polidori. Trapped indoors by storms, they read ghost stories aloud by candlelight from Phantasmagoriana. Thunder rattled the windows. Candle flames trembled. One night, Byron proposed a challenge. Each would write a ghost story of their own. Byron scribbled a fragment about spirits. Polidori wrote The Vampire, the first modern vampire tale. Percy drowned himself in verse. And Mary dreamed. She saw a pale student kneeling beside his creation. She saw lightning jolt it to life. She saw the horror when it opened its eyes. That vision became Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. It was published anonymously in 1818. Critics doubted a young woman could have written it. But Mary had stitching grief, science, and terror into one of the most enduring Gothic novels ever written. That summer cursed them all. Polidori would die by suicide at 25. Byron's daughter Allegra would die in a convent at age 5. Byron himself would die in Greece at 36. Percy would drown at 29. And Mary would outlive them all, carrying the storm in her pen. By 1822, the Shelleys lived in Italy with their last surviving child, Percy Florence. Their circle was made of dreamers and revolutionaries, but death stalked even there. Mary dreamed of Percy drowning, his pale body washing ashore. Weeks later, that dream came true. Percy himself claimed to have seen his own double, a doppelganger pointing slightly toward the sea. In folklore, such doubles were omens of death. On July 8th of 1822, Percy set sail on a small boat, the Don Juan. A sudden storm capsized it. His body washed ashore 10 days later. At Via Reggio, his body was cremated on the beach. Friends watched the flames consume him, flesh, hair, bone. But one thing that the fire could not touch was his heart. Doctors later said tuberculosis had calcified it. Others whispered that love itself had kept it whole. The relic lifted from the ash and given to Mary. And for 30 years she kept it wrapped in silk, locked in her desk, besides locks of her dead children's hair and her unfinished manuscripts. Mary never remarried. She carried her grief into every page she wrote, from Matilda to The Last Man, where a lone survivor wanders a plague-ravaged earth, modeled on Percy. She preserved his work, edited his poems, and ensured that he would be remembered. Without her, his words might have vanished. When Mary died in 1851, her son Percy Florence opened her desk. Inside, he found the unburned heart of his father, locks of hair from his dead siblings, and pages soaked in grief and ink. Mary and Percy Shelley's love was never safe, never gentle. It was grave dirt and scandal, storm and exile. A marriage made in fire and mourning. They began at a grave, they ended at a pyre. and everything in between was written in shadows. Mary and Percy Shelley were not just writers, not just lovers. They were, and will always remain, the most Gothic couple in history.